In this how-to session, I will give you a quick overview of the file synchronization. Let's start by creating a new project that I'm going to put directly on my desktop here, and I'm going to create it. And the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to import an asset. So I am going to go under my library, asset, and import. And I got this GLTF file on my desktop here that I'm going to open up right away. I am going to import it. It's going to take a second. And I am going to move my camera to have a better look at it. Select the object here and make it non-static. And I'm going to give a little offset on the x-axis here. And we're going to go a bit closer to have a good view. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go under Application Properties, and here under the File Synchronization panel, I am going to ensure that file synchronization is on. Basically, the way the other software are using, they are synchronizing the asset itself. The NRG editor is a bit different on this subject. It is synchronizing the content of the asset. And I'm going to explain and demonstrate that to you in a second. So I have this element here, and what I'm going to do, if I have a look at its texture here and its material, what I'm going to do is I am now going to import, I save this base color as a separate file here. And with file synchronization on, I'm going to go under import, and I'm going to select this base color here. I'm going to open it up, import it. It's going to take a second. There's a 2K texture here. And I'm going to go under its material, select the first texture slot where it's located, drag and drop it. No changes here. I am going to get rid of my untitled here since I don't need it. And what I'm going to do is I am going to jump in the GIMP where I have it open, and I am simply going to go under color and let's say curve. And I want to have it a bit more bright. I'm going to click OK on that. And I'm also going to resize since it's a big texture, let's say 512, 512. So the process is going to be faster to update. I am now going to go under File and Override Base Color. And as it happened, I can see directly that the changes are automatically updated in my viewport here. I can go with something a bit more crazy. Let's say that I select this area here, drag and drop the red color. Once again, File, Override Base Color. And as soon as the file has been written, I can directly see my changes right away. So basically, if you're using the GIMP or Photoshop, Substance Painter, or a Material Maker, every export, by synchronizing your texture that way, you're going to be able to do changes on the fly and see right away the result on the viewport directly in your application. I am going to undo that, and I am going to restore my original base color here. I will not be needing this. And this thing goes also beyond just the simple texturing here. Let's take an example, a script. Let's say that you do not want to use the default code editor inside the NRG editor, and you prefer to use, we are on Windows, let's say Visual Studio. I am going to create a new Lua file here. And I'm going to call it print.lua. Yes. And I am going to fire Visual Studio to load it. I am having it here, and I'm going to go back to my NRG editor, and with, once again, file synchronization on, I am going to go under my root, and I'm going to say asset new script, and I am going to specify this time the script file, and I'm going to select my print.lua. I'm going to open that up, create, and I am now having my print.lua that is part of my file synchronization list here. I am going to create a new thread on my application, and I am simply going to drag my script 0 in the slot here. If we take a look at the event, no result found, we are going to open up our Visual Studio with our print.lua loaded, and we are going to we're going to create a new function here that I'm going to call on update, and I am going to print, let's say utils and get milli time. So we are going to see a real update here. done. And now I'm going to slice over here and I'm going to show my console on one side. So we're going to be able to see directly what are the changes. As soon as I click the save button, we are going to see that now my console is printing the current time in millisecond. And the code editor I've been open with the content of my file. As I mentioned earlier, it is not the actual asset that is synchronized, but the content of that asset file that I've been entered into my file synchronization list here. So I am going to move that aside and let's go one step further. And this time let's use the same concept, the same process to have a custom shader. So I am going to go under my library and I'm going to go under asset and I am going to fire up a new shader of the type fragment. And I'm going to jump on my desktop and create now two files that I'm going to call vertex.vsh for vertex shader. And since I want to use Visual Studio to edit my shader in Visual Studio for syntax highlight, I'm going to need to use the pixel shader extension. So fragment.psh instead of VSH here. And I am going to simply drag and drop those two files here. And what I'm looking for is to basically replace I'm going to put that aside. I want to replace the default shader that is used here with my own custom one. So I am going to specify my vertex shader and I am going to specify my fragment shader, create. And now I have my shader that is created here. I am going to access the material for this guy here and the current material. The current shader is set to shaders PBR base. I am simply going to drag and drop my new asset. Now, nothing has been compiled yet. I am going to access the coding layout and go search the actual code of that PBR base shader, which is generated with nodes. I am going to go under the code directly and I am going to copy the vertex shader and paste that vertex shader inside my file here. And I'm going to repeat the process for my fragment shader. Same thing, select everything, jump into my Visual Studio and copy that. I'm going to jump back to my default layout here and pop my Visual Studio. And as I compile here, as I save, it will automatically be compiled. And now I got the result of this shader that is entirely editable in Visual Studio. Now we have lost a few uniform if we have access to our user variable that come directly generated from our code here. I do not want a emissive color. I'm going to set that to 0 and do not use vertex color. I got a surface map, occlusion map, normal map, no emissive map, and a color map here. And now I can simply edit my code once it is synchronized, I can simply edit my code in Visual Studio. Let's do something like multiply by red. And as I save, my shader is directly updated and I can see the result in real time. This approach works for textures that are also connected to CubeMap. CubeMap will be updated automatically. It works for a script, a shader, compute shader, and fragment shader, and geometry shaders as well. So to have a bit more control over the synchronization settings itself, you can also access File and Show and Hide Preferences, and under Editor Settings here, we have a bunch of options that are related to our file synchronization. We can enable it or disable it. This is the maximum amount of time per second that the file synchronization can take. If we start to have many files that are synchronized, it's going to slow down the IDE. And this is the threshold, the timeout to say this is taking too long. And the file sync timeout is how often the editor will look for an update in any of the files that are currently on the list. So based on your preferences, you can crank it up or crank it down by default. These are the default settings, which give relatively good results. But based on your preferences, you might want to tweak these settings. So that was how file synchronization is working and how it is implemented into the NRG editor.